As a longtime MCU fan, I think I speak for many when I say that, unfortunately, Phase 4 has been largely underwhelming. I myself was ready to tap out after the disappointments of Black Widow, Multiverse of Madness, Love and Thunder, and the caravan of flaming garbage that She-Hulk was, and I consider myself a very lenient audience. But despite 8 Disney Plus shows, the Werewolf by Night short film, the upcoming Guardians Christmas special, and the lovable little oddball I Am Groot, when it dawned on me that Wakanda Forever was the last movie of Phase 4, my first thought was, wait, already? Because although Phase 4 had by far the most volume, it's also been the least satisfying. So ahead of Wakanda Forever releasing, I had massive doubts. While it's not uncommon for Marvel to successfully interlace tons of storylines into one film, like they did in Avengers, Civil War, Infinity War, or Endgame, I thought Wakanda Forever in particular had a lot of movieing to do in order to work. And simply put, even if Ryan Coogler is a fantastic director and I like everything he's done, I had lost quite a bit of faith in Marvel during Phase 4 and their ability to organically tell stories without shoehorning a message or promoting next product or somehow dampening their own legacy. Well, let's be real. They kinda did all that here, but it's not all bad. Just bear with me. Here's a breakdown of everything the movie had to do and how it did it. Number 1, deal with and explain the death of King T'Challa, its circumstances and consequences. Did it do that? Well, sort of, but not really, although partly on purpose. The movie starts in medias res, showing Shuri scrambling to save her brother, who's supposedly in a separate medical room during the last moments of his life. He's been infected with an unknown virus, and his system is unable to fight it off because the purple flower, which gave him strength, has been destroyed in the first film. Now, despite Shuri and her AI trying everything to recreate the flower, her mother, Queen Ramonda, walks in and tells her that it is too late. The king has died. Did that work for me? For the most part, yes, but it was impossible not to notice how little context was given to T'Challa's extreme deterioration in health since the last movie. While I understand that the absence of the heart-shaped herb makes it harder for him to heal, we still have every reason to believe that T'Challa is a tough motherfucker, even without the herb. In Black Panther, for example, he has his strength stripped away before his fight against Killmonger, and despite being repeatedly punched in the face, cut, even stabbed, thrown from the top of a waterfall, and exposed to freezing temperatures, the motherfucker's still hanging on to life. There's very little information in the sequel about what could have taken such a robust man down, but it's probably better that way given the inescapable real-life circumstances making it obvious that his character has to die. Although, it's inconsistent with not just Wakandan tech in general, but Shuri in particular, how after magically healing Everett Ross's pretty serious spine bullet wound overnight in the first film, now she's completely at a loss and the technology lacking to treat a simple virus. And speaking of the virus, whatever it is it contagious? Is anybody else in danger? Nobody else in Wakanda took the heart-shaped herb, so isn't the whole country exposed? All that aside, the opening scene did a fantastic job at emotionally investing the audience immediately without spending 40 minutes taking us to an outcome we all knew. For example, having T'Challa die off screen was probably the most respectable and respectful thing to do with the character if you're gonna have him die at all. An on-screen death would have required some CGI model of Chadwick Boseman walking around, and I certainly didn't want to see that at any point, nor do I think it would have been extremely well received nor made. What with Marvel's visual effects looking criminally poor at the moment, that thing would have looked worse than Axel's face in Love and Thunder, and yes, I do mean both versions. The Marvel title card sequence, playing in silence while showing pictures of Chadwick Boseman, was so overwhelmingly effective that I could already hear sniffles from a few seats away. His funeral is also extremely powerful. The soundtrack is majestic, and together with the authentic emotions shown on screen, will probably go down as one of the most memorable moments of Phase 4, if not the MCU altogether.
Should Marvel have recast Chadwick? Gee, I don't know. Should the LA Lakers have retired Kobe's number 8 and number 24 jerseys? Oh wait, they did. In 2017, after his retirement, long before he passed. Did the numbers stop existing just because Kobe retired? No. So why shouldn't another player be able to step into the jerseys and pick up from where he left off? Perhaps because it's better to let that particular player create his own legacy in the industry rather than living under the immense pressure of being constantly associated with, compared to, and stuck under someone else's shadow. Someone so emblematic, so loved, that they'll always end up looking like a cheap sequel in comparison. And that is my answer to the Chadwick question. Yes, Marvel have recast roles before. Terrence Howard as Rhodey, Cassie Lang, who keeps changing faces for some reason, and more recently, Harrison Ford as Thunderbolt Ross following William Hurt's regrettable passing. But come on guys, it would be playing dumb or being purposefully disingenuous to claim that these are even remotely similar examples. Terrence Howard was a notoriously shitty person to work with and shit-talked Marvel and Robert Downey Jr. pretty badly in the press. William Hurt, meanwhile, won an Oscar in 1986. I wasn't even born back then. His career is so rich and goes so far back that Thunderbolt Ross was probably just a background of a background role for him, as well as a background of a background character in the MCU. I mean, be honest, how many heroes and characters can you name before you ever get to Thunderbolt Ross? Chadwick Boseman, however, was both loved and respected, as well as embodied the role so perfectly that even after playing Jackie Robinson, James Brown, Thurgood Marshall, and a literal god, T'Challa is by far the highlight of his career. So while I've heard both good and bad arguments as to recasting him, I never fully sided with either, and I was more than happy to wait and see what Marvel would do. They chose not to recast him, and I don't hate what they did with the decision. As much as I acknowledge Disney is an exploitative corporation that doesn't give a fuck about your feelings, one has to be the devil's advocate sometimes and recognize that this isn't an easy situation for the men and women who knew Chadwick Boseman, and that us, the people, were always going to be unhappy regardless. Number 2. Be a satisfying sequel to the worldwide hit and cultural phenomenon that Black Panther was. Did it do that? Well, to my estimations, kind of. Mostly, sort of. My biggest criticism, however, and one that might have frustrated a lot of viewers, is the significant drop in the actual amount of Black Panther we get to see on screen. Be prepared for a lot of build-up, which does drag on. When we finally get there, it's rather lackluster. Shuri is pretty much only in the suit for the final fight, which lasts 3, maybe 5 minutes, and the rest of the time she's in the suit, she just mostly stares at people. For the first hour and a half of this film, if not more, the Black Panther is mostly background. This is because we find out at the start that Queen Ramonda has retired the Black Panther as an antiquated symbol, and I started asking myself questions there. Why would she need to do that? I understand that at the age of 60, you may not be fit enough to go around fly-kicking terrorists, which is not at all to suggest that Angela Bassett couldn't do that, because she looks fucking ripped. But as far as I know, the status of king or queen of Wakanda is not at all tied to the status of Black Panther, who's more of a protector, as shown in Civil War when T'Challa is not yet officially king but is already traveling around using the suit. By my calculations, the only requirements for using the Black Panther suit are to take the heart-shaped herb and be relatively young, fit, and willing to scrap. M'Baku, anyone? Okoye, anyone? Ah, but, I hear you say, Killmonger has burnt all the heart-shaped herbs in the first movie, so that means there can't be a Black Panther anymore. Exactly, so what was the necessity for Queen Ramonda to ban it altogether? It seems like overkill and a bit disrespectful to me when it's the status of your country that's been around for thousands of years. One recurrent criticism in Marvel movies is that nothing is permanent. How many times has Loki died? The Infinity Stones are used, then destroyed, but don't worry, we can just go back in time because Tony Stark figures out time travel on the whim. Gamora dies, but she comes back from the past. The Sokovia Accords are hotly debated, then put into place, but repealed in one line. The Hulk's arm is destroyed and said to be unfixable, but it's conveniently healed off-screen. It always feels like anything that could be of major negative consequence going forward, each movie kind of rewrites it as it pleases. And the case of the heart-shaped herb is no different. Burning everything in the first movie was a bold choice, but even back then I knew, oh well, somebody's gonna bring it back in the sequel. But interestingly enough, I couldn't help but feel like that one made sense in universe. If you've seen The Martian, which is also sci-fi but much more grounded in reality, the protagonist, Mark Watney, creates water on the surface of fucking Mars. I repeat, because you didn't hear me the first time. He creates water on Mars. That beats in a cave with a box of scraps by 1,000. I mean, sure, He's also a smart dude. I mean, it's not every redneck that gets to work for NASA, but he's meant to be a botanist, not a molecular chemist. Still, he figures it out with reduced brain capacity from starvation. Now, no one knows for sure the limits of Shuri's intellect, but she seems to be an all-around super genius who even put Bruce Banner to shame. She's an expert-level doctor, engineer, scientist, designer, etc. So it's not that far-fetched, given her skills and all the equipment at her disposal, that she'd be able to synthesize one dumb plant when Mark Watney can just invent water and grow a crop of potatoes on a planet where literally fucking nothing grows. And while it does continue an unfortunate tradition, it is somewhat earned because we actually see Shuri work for it, try and fail again and again. While it does continue an unfortunate tradition, it is earned because we actually see Shuri work for it, try and fail again and again. To me, that's enough to make the moment work. I couldn't stand it if we were given another scene where the magical MacGuffin is created off screen, like the Iron Gauntlet in Endgame. It also is useful to the story because it shows us how smart and resilient Shuri is. Just like the only reason the plant was destroyed in the first movie in the first place was to show us how selfish Killmonger was. Plus, it's set up early enough in the movie that Shuri disagrees with her mom's decision to #cancel Black Panther, so that's enough motivation for her to bring the herb back. But not only that, she also wants to use it to go toe-to-toe with Namor and save her kingdom despite the risks to her personal safety, which is even more compelling. One good rule of thumb for sequels is that they need to bring more. More characters, more spectacle, more stakes, just more movie. FYI, the perfect example of that is Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which over-delivers in all the aforementioned categories. There is a fair sense of heightened stakes in Wakanda Forever, but the plot mostly focused on character development rather than throwing a bunch of storylines at you, or at least that's when it's at its best. Speaking of development, I thought Shuri's character arc was incredible. From her beginnings in the first movie as a looked down upon teenager, to her maturity in overcoming grief in the second movie, and finally accepting her responsibilities as Queen and Black Panther by the end. She goes through every challenge with grace and never lets her damaged emotional state get the better of her, even when there's hints that she might. I liked that the script respected her and us enough to acknowledge her darker thoughts, which are framed realistically in the midst of all this loss. After all, overwhelming grief is what turned Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader, and perhaps this is where Wakanda Forever introduces another set of stakes. Should Shuri turn into a tyrant, Wakanda is forever altered, and with all the military might at her disposal, the entire world is at threat. Shuri isn't much older than the teenager we met in the first movie, but to quote Jay-Z, her demeanor, 30 years her senior. Number 3, introduce Riri Williams / Ironheart. Did it do that? Well, yes, it introduced her, but did it do it well? Let's see. Riri Williams is a teenage MIT super genius who's invented a vibranium detector as a school project which exposed the underwater kingdom of Talokan. Its ruler, Namor, wants to kill her for it, I think. Or something, I guess. Yeah, okay, that part didn't completely make sense to me, but it was apparently enough to bring Riri Williams into the story. It's just that it wasn't much at all. I would have been tempted to say that she was the most shoehorned-in character in any MCU project ever, but then I remembered Peter Parker in Civil War and I calmed down immediately. Peter Parker was plucked out of obscurity as a 14-year-old by Tony Stark himself and thrown into a fight between super soldiers, mutant witches, an android with a goddamn laser beam on his forehead and also who can fly, a bird-looking dude with a goddamn killer drone friend, and a guy who can turn himself really small or really big. He has no connection to anyone in that fight or the ideals fought over, nor are his powers so overwhelmingly awesome that they can change the outcome of the fight in Tony's favor. So let's be honest here. It is fair to think Riri Williams was forced into Wakanda Forever. It's blatant. But while two wrongs don't make a right, be consistent. You can't criticize her appearance in Wakanda Forever without criticizing Peter Parker's appearance in Civil War. Riri Williams at least had some connection to the plot, no matter how awkwardly written, and most importantly, she wasn't a literal child. Oh, but Spider-Man is a popular character, and you were looking forward to seeing him, so that's okay. But when it's Riri Williams, that's just a sign of Marvel being extra woke and la-di-da. I'm not gonna take sides on this tedious debate, I just want consistency. Having said that, I don't think all that screen time for Riri was warranted either. She could have been locked away in a vault in Wakanda for protection, and the rest of the movie would have turned out exactly the same without her. The role of hyper-intelligent black teenage girl was already filled by Shuri, and there's nothing to suggest that whatever ideas Riri had, like for example depriving Namor of humidity to weaken him, Shuri wouldn't have arrived at eventually. She's also not much of a fighter, not much of a strategist, and though the script does everything to give her a comedic edge, she's not exactly Ned levels of likable or funny. Was she interesting at least? Nope. I'm sorry, I didn't think so. I didn't feel any emotional connection to her at all, despite the script giving her a somewhat sad backstory with her dead father's scar and whatnot, but that's still a long way from making her compelling. She's smart and she builds things, she's black, she likes cars, and her daddy is dead. These are basically the same traits as Johnny Storm in Fantastic, and I don't remember that character making any waves. Any minute Riri Williams was given distracted from the much more compelling characters around her: Shuri, Okoye, Queen Ramonda, and Goddess Lupita. I mean, Nakia. Well, Nakia wasn't given much to do, but Lupita could just stand there doing nothing at all, and I'd still pay money to watch. I mentioned the performances earlier, and they're closely weaved into how I feel about a character. Letitia Wright, Denai Guerrera, Angela Bassett, and Lupita all deliver the types of powerful performances required from such an emotionally charged movie, and it never feels manipulative or unearned, but it's almost like Dominic Thorne / Riri Williams is in another movie. Her character is far from being the dumb comic relief, yet some of her lines are delivered like she's on That's So Raven. It's not helped by the fact that her strong American accent is in very sharp contrast to almost everyone else's she shares a scene with, making her even more separate from them. I wouldn't go as far as to say she's bad, but I could tell the actress was acting, which is, well, not good. Now, in fairness, Dominic Thorne has an incredibly young career. Wakanda Forever is only her third movie. I have seen If Beale Street Could Talk and Judas and the Black Messiah, but to be honest, I couldn't remember her character at all if you put a gun to my head. While I can tell that her career is going from strength to strength, there seems to be a pattern where she's the weaker link in the face of the acting juggernauts opposite her, and Wakanda Forever is no exception. Let's see how she fares as the lead in her own project. But quick reminder that it's not just Golden Globe winners like Angela Bassett or Oscar winners like Lupita in the MCU. I don't dislike the idea of a potential Ironheart / Miss Marvel team up in the future, and I'm convinced that Iman Vellani will act circles around Dominic Thorne. And while you could forgive Thorne for not being Meryl Streep after only 3 movies, Iman Vellani was a complete first-timer in Miss Marvel and smashed it out of the fucking park. Not to mention, she's a lot younger as well, thus the potential for her to improve is even greater than Thorne's. Back to the movie, there is a scene where Okoye, Shuri, and Riri are being chased by the FBI. Shuri is on a motorcycle, Okoye is driving a car, and Riri is flying her Iron Suit prototype. How did she create it? What is she powering it with? No one knows. But anyway, at some point, Shuri's AI informs her that there's a drone at 80,000 feet altitude tracking her. Now, why would the drone be tracking Shuri and Shuri only when the sole reason for the car chase in the first place is that the FBI is after Riri Williams? Completely unclear. I thought, perhaps the drone thought they were on the same vehicle, but it's kinda hard to miss the fucking flying mech suit, especially that one of the feds actually identifies Riri Williams wearing it before she takes off. Well, no matter. Riri somehow decides to fly up at 80,000 feet and shoot the drone down. Have you fixed the icing problem, Riri? Apparently not at all. The icing problem in her case is not even actual icing. At 80,000 feet, it's a lack of oxygen. And somehow this genius level engineer didn't think to plan for that when designing her flying suit. Okay, then why did you think it was a good idea to go after a drone when you can't breathe at high altitudes? It was not even an attack drone, it was just a surveillance drone. Going after it was a completely unnecessary detour, if not for the fact that she later uses it as a weapon by dropping it on a barrage of cops and it explodes, absolutely murdering them in the process. And the movie never acknowledges that. That is not a, oh, maybe they survived that moment. No, it's a clear, thanks for the barbecue, now the whole town's gonna smell of crispy bacon for the next week moment. You just murdered innocent men, Riri. And to quote Jules from Pulp Fiction, I'd like you to fucking acknowledge that. This whole drone thing was more badly inserted into the movie than Riri herself. Not only does the plot invent this pointless side quest, but all it does is result in Riri almost dying and a few cops definitely dying. Number 4. Introduce a whole new set of villains and make them compelling. Did it do that? Meh. In the movie, Namor, the Talokan king, promises to go to war against Wakanda. The script wants us really hard to believe that this Namor is as strong as the Hulk. Even M'Baku says it at some point, and that his kingdom is as powerful as Wakanda. But that's not believable for even 1 second. One could point out that the Wakandans still live in what looks like straw huts and ride giant rhinos into war, use spears, and still engage in ritual fighting, but they do have super awesome tech like Shuri's lab, which looks cool as shit, their fighter ships, their force shield, the one that withstands explosions and the one that makes them invisible, Shuri's epic supersonic arm cannons, their maglev railway, remotely piloted devices, their hilariously OP magic balls that can do pretty much anything the script demands them to, yet are only used a handful of times to make phone calls. Oh, and not to forget an entire indestructible suit that can fit in a necklace. That's nothing to sneeze at, but the first time we ever meet Namor, he talks confidently to Queen Ramonda and Shuri that if Talokan goes to war against Wakanda, Wakanda doesn't stand a chance. Okay, now you're building up an awesome antagonist who not only is super strong, but also supposedly commands an army that can go toe-to-toe the most advanced country on Earth? Okay, that sounds badass, let's go. Well, except that the more I found out about Talokan, the more I wondered exactly how we were supposed to take them as such a serious threat. None of their tech is that advanced, if you could even call it that. They have masks that allow them to breathe underwater, but they look like they're made from recycled plastic found at sea, rather than vibranium or anything remotely technological. Otherwise, the only weaponry of note they have are those quote-unquote grenades they love to use, but all they do is create a water blast, which even your average person of regular strength could brush off if they hold on tight enough. The only way they can do much damage is if they're used in large quantities at once, which seems like a massive inconvenience and ridiculously backwards when you supposedly have the seemingly infinite powers of vibranium at your disposal. Wakanda's tech is so devastating, both offensively and defensively, that a citywide flood is more of a mild annoyance to them in comparison. Sure, I mean, you could argue that they're enough to kill Queen Ramonda, but I'll argue that they don't at all. Queen Ramonda only dies through a plot contrivance whereby the water blasts from the grenades throw her and Riri Williams in an already existing deep body of water, which happens to be right underneath the throne room, which is in a tall building, but whatever. And Queen Ramonda pretty much sacrifices herself to save Riri, who still hasn't fixed the lack of oxygen problem, by the way. If it wasn't for trying to save Riri, Queen Ramonda would be totally chilling because she barely looked hurt by the blast. So in a way, her death is rather a result of total luck for Namor, who couldn't possibly have predicted this exact sequence of events, rather than the result of the destructive powers of his aggressive water balloons. This next point might be a slight nitpick, but relevant regardless. I was quite confused when the first Talokan that we see on screen, whose name is Atuma, is shot at point-blank range repeatedly, but doesn't suffer any damage whatsoever. This small moment has huge implications, because it informs the audience, oh, so these characters are invulnerable. I see. Immediately after, however, other Talokans are getting shot at from a much larger distance, and they all fall over, dead, or dead enough. This doesn't make sense to me. The reverse would have worked much better to introduce a tumor as a badass mini-boss, show his troops getting picked up by bullets and falling one by one. Then, when he finally emerges from the water and comes face to face with the lady firing, she empties a full clip in him, but it has no effect. He's still standing unscathed. "Oh shit," says the audience. "This guy is fucking dangerous." Now, don't get me wrong, we still get the sense that he's a tough son of a bitch, but his introduction would have been that much more effective had it happened literally a frame later. Another event that serves to introduce these supposedly almighty antagonists is the fight versus Okoye on the bridge. Now, let me make this as extra fucking clear as humanly possible. In a movie with so many powerful characters, Okoye steals the entire fucking show. She straight up takes this movie home. I loved every second she was on screen. I'm probably a certified Okoye fanboy after this film. One of my favorite moments from hers is in the first movie when her ex-husband, Wakabi, asks her, "Would you kill me, my love?" And she answers, "For Wakanda, without question." And I was over the moon when this movie referenced it. But let's put it this way. The four-way fight versus the Tolokans on the bridge serves less as a way to make them look lethal, as it ends up making Okoye look absolutely fucking indestructible. And as cool as that is, it's also kind of a shame. There is a clear conflict of interest here between the movie wanting to make the Dora Milaje into these fierce warriors and introducing the Tolokans as a credible threat. But when 4 Tolokans can't fight off one ashy woman wielding a sharp stick, then they kind of look super lame. Not to mention, Okoye had just been in a pretty serious car crash and they still could not beat her. That included Atuma, by the way, who less than a minute ago could withstand bullet fire. The scene hurts the entire movie. Heroes are only as good as their villains, and when your villains are neither super strong nor super advanced nor super bright, this makes the hero defeating them look a lot less glorious. When Shuri is captured and brought on a sightseeing tour of Tolokan, we can see a little bit of the kingdom, but it kinda looks like shit. Yeah, I wrote that. While I respect the integration of traditional symbols the designers weaved into the architecture, everything's kinda rusty and dark otherwise, and there's this general favela vibe to it. Children wearing rags, playing with whatever the fuck they found floating around. Even the prison where Riri and Shuri are taken is more of a salt mine than anything high-tech. And well, sure enough, they get rescued without much difficulty, but I don't mind that because that means Nakia is on screen and compared to Loken to the Kingdom of Atlantis in 2018's Aquaman, I wasn't exactly a fan of this movie, but for fuck's sake, at least Atlantis looks like a place you'd want to live. The design skillfully integrates sea life, vegetation, and mind-blowing technology. Ships that look like dolphins, turtles swimming next to traffic, whales pulling cargo, fucking laser sharks, a complicated network of interconnected lanes, vibrant colors, everything so rich and eye-catching that you can barely process it. Even the sound design is immersive. In contrast, Tolokan feels drab, desolate, and sad. A place you'd stop at for resupply then sail the fuck away from at dusk, rather than willingly spend the next 500 years in. I understand there's only so much room for 2 high-tech underwater kingdoms, but audiences would be able to tolerate something that looks a little bit more developed than a spelunking spot without accusing you of plagiarizing Aquaman. One quick look at Atlantis and you're more likely to believe, oh shit, Wakanda is totally fucked going to war against them, than I ever felt in 20 minutes of screen time spent in Tolokan. But oh well, at least Tolokan doesn't have an Amber Heard. There is of course a final battle between the 2 kingdoms, and the movie manufactures an impending sense of doom for the Wakandans when they get surrounded by the Tolokans who are in an overwhelming surplus. But how did that happen, Wakandans? Where are your force shields and arm cannons? The Tolokans, while strong, are clearly destructible, and they only use spears. They don't even use armor, even after it's made clear that Wakandan guns can kill them, as established during the scene where Goddess Nakia, breaks Shuri and Riri out of Tolokan prison. Where are those guns now? The battle takes place on what is a previously unseen giant fuck-off Wakandan submarine, which should come with armor and an internal defense system like turrets and cannons and the likes, but nope, nothing. It only has a sonic blast that shoots from underneath the ship and to the water below, but even that is completely ineffectual because a single Talokan woman is enough to swim up against it and destroy it armed with nothing but a toothpick. Then a bunch of Talokans swim up to the ship carrying a gigantic net of those water grenades, but all these do is shake the boat up a little bit, and that's literally it. So, to quote Bill the Butcher, is this it? Namor's army? A few crusty bitches and a handful of ragtags? It's frustrating and inconsistent to the average thinking person. When one Dora Milaje earlier in the movie can take on 4 Talokans at once, including the big bulletproof dude, but now several Dora Milajes plus the Jabaris, who by the way look like they don't fuck around, plus Ironheart are struggling. That's the movie setting something up then failing to pay it off. But to be fair, it's also probably not the smartest thing to fight the fish people in the middle of the sea. Just a thought. The battle isn't exactly an exciting affair either. I think the movie wanted to deliver on the early promise of a war between these supposedly super powerful kingdoms, but I feel like a longer fight between just Shuri and Namor would have been a much better climax. Just like between T'Challa and Killmonger, there is enough of a connection between the two to make for good drama. Unfortunately, its potential is squandered because it's intercut with the bigger battle on the boat, which is simply just not that interesting. Ironheart does a few flippy flips, but nothing we haven't seen Iron Man do, and certainly not enough to overthrow the Talokans, so yay for the entire character's presence, I guess. And about the Shuri versus Namor fight, I liked that the filmmakers seem to have learned from the first movie in that the protagonist and the antagonist actually look different. That means you can tell them apart at first glance. It also takes in broad daylight instead of a badly lit tunnel, which helps. They dialed down on the CGI, even if there's still a lot of floating heads, but sadly regressed on one aspect. In understanding that a small, intimate fight between 2 headstrong people fighting over ideals or a shared past is a lot more effective than a huge war where we barely know anyone's name and simply do not have the capacity to care about most deaths. Although it was entirely predictable, the fact that Shuri gets her ass absolutely handed to her in the final fight against Namor, gets stabbed but gets back up, and is able to use her intellect to defeat her physically tougher opponent, as well as show compassion and spare his life despite her earlier promises to watch him die, are the same heroic qualities and the same fighting spirit we've seen in characters like Peter Parker, Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Sarah Connor. We can argue about the fight choreography or the internal logic of Shuri's plan to expose herself to fire rather than quietly subjugating Namor from the back, but these are separate issues. I thought the script, including the fight, didn't make one mistake when it comes to her overarching arc whatsoever. As far as Namor goes, I am very happy that it gives a chance for Mesoamericans such a huge moment on screen. I can relate, and I hope it's close to how I felt when I first watched Black Panther in 2018 and saw so many faces and garments, accents and traditions that I grew familiar with as an African kid myself. There were discussions about his name and how it deviated from the comics, etc., which is always gonna happen. Many people will hate for the sake of hating, and don't give credit where it's due as long as the thing isn't exactly what they wanted. But I don't read comics, so I can't pretend I ever gave a fuck, and can promise to be entirely unbiased on this particular point. The name and its pronunciation makes sense in the movie. I don't know why they changed it, and I don't care, but it made sense how they did it. That's all I can say. Number 5. Expand the MCU. Did it do that? Let's see. In terms of world building, there isn't much to this movie we don't already know. I was very surprised by how many places we traveled to so early on, but there isn't much we learned from Wakanda. No new locations, new laws, traditions, or systems. This was disappointing because it gives the feeling that everything about such a rich culture was shown in one movie and there's nothing left to cover. I did like, however, that they referenced older Black Panthers all the way to the very first one. And while we do travel to Talokan, we don't really see much of their culture or rituals, and once again, even less to suggest that they're as mighty as Wakanda. But there are a few more things I can say about expansion. Firstly, at the end of the movie, Talokan and Wakanda unite forces. Yes, it's revealed that Namor has ulterior motives, but I still want to see where the alliance, however long it stands, can bring the kingdoms and drive the stories going forward. Secondly, Elaine from Seinfeld is back, since we last saw her in the Black Widow after credits. It's revealed that she's Everett Ross's ex-wife, which unfortunately it turns out that nobody gives a fuck about. I like Everett Ross, don't get me wrong, but no one ever asked, hey, I wonder who he's been fucking. And as for Goth Elaine, she's basically going to be the next Nick Fury, tasked in Phase 5 with gathering the Thunderbolts, i.e. Yelena, John Walker, Red Guardian and Ghost, as well as probably the Young Avengers, i.e. Miss Marvel, Riri Williams, America Chavez, Kate Bishop and the likes. Her sudden prominence in such a major movie shows that we're actually supposed to pay attention to this character. Oh, thanks for letting us know, guys. Gotta go back and watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier. With Nick Fury up to whatever the fuck is gonna happen in Secret Invasions, it makes sense for a similar character to pick up the torch at this juncture. It's just such a shame that she's completely uninteresting and unmemorable, and ever since she was in, I just couldn't wait for it to be over. It's a far cry from the intriguing, intimidating, looming figure that Nick Fury was in Phase 1, where every cameo of his you couldn't wait to see more of him. Thirdly, there is an after-credit scene that introduces T'Challa and Nakia's son. For fuck's sake, kid, would you leave some genetics for the rest of us? I would have loved being a fly on the wall when that baby was made, that's all I'm saying. I liked this move because if you're Marvel, it allows you to be like, see? We both recast T'Challa and didn't. By making him several years younger, you still allow for Shuri to have a longer spin with the suit, in maybe an extra movie or two. You also give women their moment, which seems to be the whole point of Phase 4. You also ensure that the character of T'Challa lives on, both physically and metaphorically, just not so soon that audiences don't miss him first. Even if the sequels further expand Shuri's arc, which I'm all for if it's done as well, there is a great opportunity here to see how this kid is brought up, how he's trained to become king, his relationship with his aunt, if he has the ardent patriotism that his father had, or is kind of more chill about it, his relationship with his mother as well, and all these lovely things so that we're already attached to him when it's time for his own movie. And lastly, well, number 6. Introduced the world to a new Black Panther. Did it do that? Let's see. This point ties into the previous point. Expanding the MCU and introducing the new Black Panther are similar ambition, because a threequel would be dead on arrival had Wakanda Forever not convinced us that Shuri was the right person to carry the costume and symbol forward. And well, what can I say? Once again, her arc was nearly flawless. Everything else about the movie aside, I don't remember being that invested in a protagonist since Peter Parker in Homecoming. Highest congratulations to Letitia Wright, man. She had such a hard job to do, balancing all these responsibilities at once. It must not be easy helming such a massive blockbuster, following the worldwide phenomenon that the first movie was, and following in the footsteps of the legendary person Chadwick Boseman has become. Her task and Shuri's are exact mirrors of each other, but thankfully both of them are talented and smart enough to pull it off. As I mentioned earlier, the movie does make you wait to see the actual suit, but Shuri undergoes such massive growth in that time period that I was more than happy to delay the appearance of the suit and follow her emotional journey further. When she finally shows up on screen wearing the suit, yes, it's late, but gosh, is it earned. The character has earned it, the movie has earned it. I'm sure a few media outlets will overuse the term emotional when describing this film, which could be read with skepticism as a way to manipulate audiences into wholesale loving this movie and sparing it from criticism. I'm not being swayed by any of this either way. The movie, like any other, deserves plenty of criticism, but again, the movie hooks you into Shuri's emotional struggles from the very second it starts. Remember, it opens on her, not anyone else. Her. In the middle of an emotional crisis trying to save her brother's life. She fails, then she loses her mother. Two heartbreaking tragedies in the same movie, but somehow she overcomes. Then she becomes queen. Then she synthesizes the heart-shaped her back into existence and finally brings back the Black Panther. Now, I watch movies with my brain at least halfway switched on. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to analyze them critically, but I consider myself an emotionally driven person. So when she lands in front of the Jabari tribe wearing the suit for the first time, in front of M'Baku of all people, who once publicly demeaned her by calling her a child, nothing else about the movie mattered. Not how good or bad it was, not how long or short it was, not how much sense the plot did or didn't make. It was just me, in this moment, being drawn into this character's struggles, her journey towards overcoming, and her ultimate triumph. How can you not call this emotional? How can you not call this compelling? How can you not call this earned? Now that we have gone through the list, here's the last few general things I'd like to say about the film. Firstly, I haven't had a chance to gush over the soundtrack enough, but seriously, it blows the first movie's soundtrack out of the water. It does everything a sequel is supposed to do, in that it's more epic, it's more varied, it's more nuanced, it's more grandiose. There are a lot of bold choices for a Marvel/superhero movie, but they never feel too weird or too out of place. It reminded me of some of my emotions when I first watched Django Unchained, where with almost every track I thought, oh, okay, that's different, but I fucking dig it though. Secondly, holy shit, if this movie isn't a shoo-in for Best Costumes Oscar, I don't even want to live. This is the best costumed movie I have seen since Dune, which for the record had the most gorgeous outfits I'd ever seen on film. Queen Ramonda fucking slays, Okoye fucking slays, M'Baku fucking slays. Killmonger returns for one scene in the astral plane, and fucking hell, what he's wearing is so simplistically beautiful. I genuinely leaned over to my girlfriend and whispered, I want one. And she responded, me too. But I think she meant Michael B. Jordan. I did like some of the design of the Talokans, but I also found it pretty dumb how they were just walking around half naked all the time. But once again, the movie lives its best work for Shuri. Everything that she wears isn't just stunning, but also an expression of her growth. Compared to the bright yellows, reds, and oranges she was wearing in the first movie, even some Virginia white, what she wears in this one informs you of her grief, her anger, and her status. Man, give it up for the costumes department, man, that's what I'm saying. In conclusion, Wakanda Forever was far from perfect. There's many things I haven't touched upon, like Namora's ridiculous fucking footwings, some of the questionable humor, or the fact that I fell asleep during the dialogue between Namora and Shuri because it was so fucking boring. Where's Taika when you need him, eh? But did I have a good time watching it? Definitely. Would I gladly watch it again? Hell yeah. A lot of lows and a few highs, but Wakanda Forever is a strong, well-made movie anchored by solid performances all around, an incredible protagonist, gorgeous costumes, and some of the best soundtrack moments in all of MCU history. Negative points for its lackluster villains, a, at times, too weak plot, and the unnecessary introduction of Riri Williams, who is not only vastly outshone by her predecessor, but by her current counterpart in the very same movie. Overall, I give Wakanda Forever a 6.8 out of 10. Thanks for watching. See you later.